I'm Cecilia, 62 years old, and until recently, I lived peacefully in my $20 million mansion in Newport Beach. My son James fell for Audrey in a whirlwind romance that left me uneasy. My intuition was right. The day came when Audrey showed up with a notary waving papers in my face. "We've sold the house, you have to move, Mom." I just smiled. She didn't realize what was coming. If you're watching this from your own family home, one that holds generations of memories like mine, hit like and subscribe. I'm about to share how I protected what my husband and I built together from someone who thought she had outsmarted a grieving widow. To understand how I ended up facing eviction from my own home, we need to go back to the beginning. My late husband Richard and I built our lives and fortune together over 40 years of marriage. We started with nothing but ambition and worked our way up in real estate development, eventually creating one of the most successful firms in Southern California. Our Newport Beach mansion was the crown jewel of our success, a 6-bedroom waterfront property with panoramic ocean views, a testament to decades of hard work. When Richard passed away 3 years ago, after a brief battle with pancreatic cancer, I was devastated. He was my partner in every sense of the word, and suddenly I found myself alone in our dream home surrounded by memories. Our son James was our only child. We had him later in life when we were both established in our careers. He grew up to become a brilliant neurosurgeon at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles. While his professional life flourished, his personal life had been more challenging. He'd had several relationships that ended badly, including a 2-year engagement that fell apart 6 months before the wedding. These experiences left him somewhat guarded, which is why I was surprised when he announced he was dating someone new just 4 months after his last breakup. I met Audrey at a charity gala benefiting the children's hospital where James worked. She was strikingly beautiful, tall blonde with perfect makeup and a dazzling smile. She introduced herself as a luxury real estate agent specializing in high-end properties. James looked at her adoringly, and I tried to be happy for him, but something felt off from the start. "Your home is absolutely legendary in real estate circles, Mrs. Wilson," Audrey gushed during our first meeting. "I've always admired it from afar. The original architect was Samuel Carson, wasn't he? His waterfront designs are simply timeless." Her knowledge of our property was impressive, but oddly specific. Throughout dinner, she asked countless questions about the house, when it was built, recent renovations, the property taxes. I noticed she paid particular attention when I mentioned that Richard had always handled the estate planning. Just 3 months after they started dating, James called to tell me they were engaged. The whirlwind romance moved so quickly that I barely had time to process it. When I expressed concern about the speed, James brushed it off. "When you know, Mom," he said firmly. "Dad would have loved her." But I wasn't convinced Richard would have loved her at all. In fact, I was starting to notice more red flags. Audrey began dropping by unexpectedly when James was at work ostensibly to bond with me. During these visits, she would wander through the house commenting on artwork and furniture, always steering the conversation toward the property itself. "Have you ever considered downsizing, Cecilia?" she asked during one such visit, running her fingers along the marble countertops in the kitchen. "This place must be so much work for just one person, and the property values in this neighborhood have skyrocketed." I also noticed how she would casually mention her expertise in helping older clients transition to more manageable living situations. She once left her tablet open on my kitchen island, and I couldn't help noticing her recent searches, inheriting property from in-laws, contesting wills, California property transfer laws. My unease grew stronger, but I hesitated to interfere. James seemed happier than he'd been in years, and I worried my concerns would sound like the jealous ramblings of an overprotective mother. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that Audrey saw my son as a means to an end, and that end somehow involved my house. I confided my suspicions to my closest friend Barbara, who had known James since he was a baby. "I'm telling you, Barb, she's not interested in James. She's interested in this house, and whatever she thinks she can get from me." Barbara nodded thoughtfully. "Have you looked into her background at all? Where's her family? What about her previous relationships?" I realized I knew surprisingly little about Audrey beyond her current job. Whenever the topic of her past came up, she would deftly change the subject. James mentioned once that she was estranged from her family, which explained why I'd never met them. Now that convenient estrangement started to seem suspicious. Meanwhile, Audrey was systematically isolating James from me. Our traditional Sunday brunches became increasingly rare as she planned competing activities. When James did visit, she was always with him monitoring our conversations. He started calling, less texting instead, and those texts became briefer and less personal. The few times I tried to express my concerns to James, he became defensive. "You're just having trouble letting go, Mom," he said during one heated discussion. "I know it's been hard since Dad died, but you need to accept that I have my own life now. Audrey is going to be my wife." I could see Audrey's influence in his words, his sudden coldness. The son who once called me his best friend now looked at me with impatience and irritation. It broke my heart, but it also strengthened my resolve to find out what Audrey was really after. Looking back, I can see exactly how she manipulated both of us, playing on his desire for companionship and my reluctance to interfere with his happiness. But at the time, I felt powerless to stop what was happening. The wedding was approaching, and with each passing day, I felt the distance between my son and me growing wider. The wedding itself was nothing like what I had imagined for my only son. Instead of the traditional ceremony we had always discussed with family, friends, and colleagues gathered at our local church, followed by a reception at our home, Audrey orchestrated a small, rushed affair at an exclusive resort in Cabo San Lucas. Only 20 guests were invited, mostly Audrey's friends from work and a few of James's colleagues. "It's just more intimate this way," James explained when I expressed surprise at the limited guest list. "Audrey doesn't have family to invite, so we thought it would be more balanced with just a small group." I noticed none of James's childhood friends were invited, nor were many of the family friends who had known him since birth. Even more telling was the complete absence of Audrey's family. When I gently inquired about this, Audrey's eyes hardened momentarily before she composed herself. "My parents passed away years ago," she said with practiced sadness, "and my siblings and I had a falling out over the estate. You know how money can poison family relationships?" The comment felt pointed, almost like a warning. Throughout the wedding weekend, I felt sidelined. Audrey had assigned me a seat at the reception that kept me far from the main wedding party. I was introduced to her friends as James's mother, rather than by my name. Small slights, perhaps, but they added up to a clear message. I was an afterthought, not a central figure in my own son's life anymore. During the reception, I overheard one of Audrey's bridesmaids, slightly drunk on champagne, mention something about Audrey's second wedding being much nicer than the first disaster. When she noticed me nearby, she quickly changed the subject. Second wedding, James had told me Audrey had never been married before. The honeymoon was a 3-week tour of Europe. When they returned, the dynamic shifted even further. James began canceling our occasional lunch dates last minute. When I did see him, he seemed distracted and evasive. Audrey, meanwhile, became more brazen in her interest in my home. "We should really update this kitchen," she announced during one visit, walking around my kitchen critically. "These cabinets are so dated, and this floor plan is wasteful. In today's market, opening up this space would add significant value." "I'm quite happy with my kitchen as it is," I replied calmly. "Richard and I designed it together." She waved her hand dismissively. "Sentimentality decreases property value, Cecilia. You have to think practically." I was stunned by her presumptuousness, but before I could respond, James stepped in. "Audrey has great taste, Mom. Maybe you should consider her suggestions." His defense of her behavior hurt more than her rudeness. My son, who had grown up in this house, who knew how much it meant to me, was siding with someone who saw it only as a financial asset. The situation deteriorated further when I discovered Audrey had been accessing my computer when I left the room during her visits. My browser history showed searches for inheriting property from in-laws, contesting wills, and California property rights of widows. I began to realize her plan likely involved gaining ownership of my home, though I wasn't yet sure how she intended to accomplish this. I also began to notice heated arguments between the newlyweds once I arrived early for dinner and overheard them in the driveway. "It's taking too long," Audrey hissed. "We need to move faster before she changes anything." "I can't just demand it," James replied, sounding stressed. "There are legal issues. The trust—" They abruptly stopped talking when they saw me approaching. Throughout dinner, Audrey was coldly polite, while James avoided eye contact. Whatever their scheme was, it clearly involved my property and some misunderstanding about Richard's estate planning. I made several attempts to connect with Audrey, hoping that perhaps I had misjudged her. I invited her to lunch, suggested we go shopping together, even offered to help her network in the local real estate community. Each overture was politely but firmly rebuffed. "I'm just so busy with work right now," she would say with an insincere smile. "Maybe another time." Meanwhile, through careful observation and some discreet inquiries, I discovered that Audrey had lied about numerous aspects of her background. She wasn't the successful luxury real estate agent she claimed to be. She had only obtained her license recently and had made just a handful of sales. Her claimed education at UCLA couldn't be verified. And most disturbing of all, she had indeed been married before, twice, both times to wealthy older men. Both marriages had ended within 2 years. When I tried to share some of these concerns with James, he exploded in anger. "Why can't you just be happy for me?" he shouted. "Ever since Dad died, you've been clinging to me. Audrey was right. You're jealous of our relationship. You need to accept that I have a wife now and she comes first." His words stung deeply, but they also confirmed my worst fear: Audrey had successfully driven a wedge between us. My son was now seeing me through her eyes, reinterpreting our close relationship as something unhealthy rather than the loving bond it had always been. As the weeks passed, I began to notice small changes around my house. Documents moved from where I had left them. My estate planning folders had been rifled through. Once I found Audrey in Richard's study quickly closing a drawer when I entered. I knew something was coming, but even I wasn't prepared for just how bold their move would be. It was a sunny Tuesday morning in April when my world turned upside down. I was enjoying my morning coffee on the terrace overlooking the ocean, planning my day, when the security system announced visitors at the gate. To my surprise, it was James and Audrey. Unusual, because James should have been at the hospital for his morning rounds and Audrey rarely visited before noon. More surprising was the third person with them, a formal-looking man carrying a briefcase. As they approached across the lawn, I could see the triumphant gleam in Audrey's eyes, poorly concealed behind a mask of solemn concern. James, by contrast, looked uncomfortable, almost ill. "Mom," he began awkwardly as they reached the terrace, "we need to talk about something important." Audrey interrupted before he could continue. "Cecilia, this is Nelson Brown. He's a notary, public and witness." Her voice was clipped professional. Gone was any pretense of warmth or family connection. "We have some documents to discuss with you." I invited them to sit, maintaining the composure my late husband had always admired. Inside, my heart was racing, but decades of business negotiations had taught me never to reveal anxiety. "What documents would those be?" I asked, pouring more coffee as if this were any ordinary visit. Audrey pulled a thick folder from her designer handbag and laid it on the table with a theatrical flourish. "These are the finalized sale documents for this property. The closing is scheduled for next week." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely confused. "Sale documents? I haven't listed this house for sale." Her smile widened, revealing perfect white teeth that suddenly seemed predatory. "No, but James has." "Well, we have as joint owners." She slid a document across the table, a property transfer I supposedly had signed 3 months earlier, giving Nemi's 50% ownership of the mansion. I recognized my signature, but knew immediately when and how they had obtained it. The document had been slipped into a stack of hospital charitable foundation papers James had asked me to sign when I was recovering from minor surgery, still groggy from anesthesia. "We've sold the house, you have to move, Mom," Audrey announced, with barely contained glee. "The buyers are offering $22 million all cash, more than generous considering the outdated interiors." The notary shifted uncomfortably clearly, sensing he had been brought into a family dispute rather than a standard transaction. "You're expected to vacate within 30 days. Audrey continued, pushing another document toward me. "We found a lovely retirement community in Arizona, very appropriate for someone in your situation." I looked at James, searching for the son I had raised. He avoided my gaze, staring at his hands folded in his lap. "It's for the best, Mom," he muttered. "The house is too much for you." "And what about the family trust?" I asked quietly. A flash of annoyance crossed Audrey's face. "James explained that your husband left everything to him with you as the trustee until James married. Now that he's married, control passes to him." She reached over to pat James's hand possessively. "We've already consulted with our attorney. Everything is perfectly legal." It was in that moment I realized the depth of the lies she had fed my son. She had completely misrepresented how Richard's estate was structured, convincing James that marriage gave him control of assets that were never his to claim. I see, I said, taking a slow sip of my coffee. And the buyers, they've done their due diligence, I presume. Title search, property inspection, verification of ownership. Of course, Audrey snapped. They're not amateurs. Now, if you'll just sign these acknowledgments. She pushed the stack of papers closer to me. I set my coffee cup down carefully. I'll need to review these with my attorney before signing anything. I'm sure you understand. Audrey's confident smile faltered slightly. There's really no need for that. Everything is standard. The sooner you sign, the sooner we can all move forward. Nevertheless, I said firmly, I'll need a few days. James finally looked up. Mom, please don't make this difficult. Audrey and I want to start our own family, build our own legacy. This is happening whether you like it or not. The coldness in his voice broke my heart, but I maintained my composure. A few days to review legal documents is hardly unreasonable, James. Your father always insisted on proper due diligence. Audrey stood abruptly, gathering the papers. Fine. You have until Friday. After that, we'll proceed regardless. She nodded to the notary, who looked relieved to be leaving. Let's go, James. As they walked away, Audrey turned back with one parting shot. Start packing, Cecilia. Downsizing can be so liberating at your age. I watched them leave my hands steady despite the turmoil inside. What Audrey didn't know, what James had apparently forgotten, was that Richard had been much more strategic than either of them realized, and I was not the helpless widow they assumed me to be. As soon as their car disappeared down the driveway, I picked up my phone and made a call I had hoped would never be necessary. Michael? It's Cecilia Wilson. I need you to activate the Richard contingency. Yes, immediately. It's exactly what he feared might happen. What Audrey and James didn't realize was that Richard had anticipated something like this might happen years ago. My husband hadn't built a real estate empire by being naive about human nature or property laws. In the final months of his life, as we sat together during his treatments, he had shared his concerns about protecting our legacy. Cecilia, he had said, holding my hand in the hospital room, James is a brilliant doctor, but terrible with financial decisions. He's too trusting, too easily influenced by the wrong people. We need to protect him from himself as much as protect our assets. Together with Michael Harrington, our attorney of 30 years, and one of Richard's closest friends, we had established an irrevocable family trust with complex layers of protection. The waterfront mansion wasn't owned by me personally. It was owned by the Wilson Family Trust, with me as the primary trustee and Michael as the secondary trustee. The morning after Audrey's ambush, I went directly to Richard's study and opened the hidden safe behind his collection of first edition Hemingway novels. Inside was a sealed envelope marked, "For Cecilia, open only when necessary." Though Richard had told me about its existence, I had never needed to open it until now. The envelope contained detailed documentation of the trust structure, letters of instruction to various financial institutions, and a personal letter from Richard that brought tears to my eyes. "My dearest Cecilia," it began. "If you're reading this, someone is trying to take what we've built together. Don't let them. You're stronger than anyone knows, smarter than anyone gives you credit for. Trust Michael. Trust yourself. And remember that our true legacy isn't the properties or accounts. It's the values we've lived by." I called Michael immediately, and within hours he was sitting across from me in Richard's study reviewing the documents Audrey had presented. "This is preposterous," he said, shaking his head at the partial ownership transfer. "First, a signature obtained under medication would never hold up in court. Second, even if it were valid, it wouldn't matter. James cannot sell this property even if you had gifted him half ownership." He pulled out the trust documents. "The mansion is held in the irrevocable family trust. Neither you nor James can sell it without unanimous approval from all trustees, which includes me. Furthermore, there's the perpetuity clause Richard insisted on. This property can only be transferred to direct blood descendants after meeting specific conditions." Relief washed over me. "So their sale is completely invalid." "Worse than invalid," Michael confirmed grimly. "It's fraud. Attempting to sell property you don't own is criminal. Audrey could face serious charges." This was both comforting and alarming. I wanted to protect my home, but I also needed to protect James from the consequences of his wife's schemes. Michael sensed my concern. Before we proceed legally, let me suggest hiring a private investigator to look into Audrey's background. The more information we have, the better position we'll be in to resolve this with minimal damage to James. Within 48 hours, the investigator delivered a report that confirmed my worst suspicions and revealed even more disturbing information. Audrey's real name was Angela Donovan. She had been married 3 times before, not twice, as I had discovered. Each marriage followed the same pattern: a whirlwind romance with a wealthy man, followed by aggressive attempts to acquire property ending in either divorce, or in one case, the husband's convenient death. She had been investigated for fraud in Arizona, but charges were dropped when the victim refused to testify. She had operated under at least 4 different aliases and had a pattern of targeting families with significant real estate holdings. Most shocking of all, she was still technically married to her 3rd husband when she met James, only finalizing that divorce weeks before their wedding. Armed with this information, I formulated a plan. Rather than immediately confronting them with legal action, I decided on a more strategic approach, one that might open James's eyes to the manipulation he'd been subjected to before the legal system became involved. I called James and left a carefully worded message. I have reviewed the documents with my attorney. I'd like to discuss next steps over dinner tomorrow night. You and Audrey are welcome to join me for a final meal in our family home. The trap was set. Audrey predictably couldn't resist the opportunity to witness what she thought would be my surrender. What she didn't know was that dinner would include some unexpected guests and revelations that would change everything. I spent the entire next day preparing for the most important dinner party of my life. Every detail had to be perfect, from the menu featuring James's favorite foods to the strategic placement of family photos throughout the dining room. I wanted to remind my son of his history, of who he really was, before Audrey rewrote his story. I set the formal dining table with our heirloom china and crystal, pieces that had been in Richard's family for generations. At each place setting, I positioned small frame photos: James's medical school graduation at my place, his childhood sailing trophy photo at his and at Audrey's place, a recent picture of the 3 of us at their wedding, one where her calculated smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Barbara arrived early to help and provide moral support. "Are you sure about this approach?" she asked, as we arranged fresh flowers from the garden. "It's not too late to just let the lawyers handle it." I shook my head firmly. "This isn't just about the house, Barb. It's about saving my son from a predator. He needs to see the truth with his own eyes." Michael arrived next, carrying a briefcase full of documents and a confidence that steadied my nerves. Detective Carlos Ramirez, who had been recommended by Michael, arrived last, parking his unmarked car down the street to avoid alerting James and Audrey prematurely. "Remember," Michael cautioned as we heard a car pulling into the driveway, "let them reveal themselves. Don't show all our cards at once." The doorbell rang precisely at 7. I opened the door to find James looking tense, and Audrey radiating smugness in an expensive new dress, clutching a document folder. She barely waited for the door to close before launching her attack. "Have you signed the acknowledgments?" she demanded, bypassing any greeting. "The buyers are getting impatient." "Good evening to you too, Audrey," I replied calmly. "James, it's good to see you. You've been so busy lately." James had the grace to look embarrassed. "Hi, Mom. You said you wanted to talk about the house." "Over dinner," I confirmed, leading them toward the dining room. "I've prepared all your favorites." Audrey frowned as we entered the dining room, and she spotted Barbara and Michael already seated. "What is this?" "We agreed to discuss the sale privately." "I don't recall agreeing to that," I said pleasantly, taking my seat at the head of the table. "Besides, Barbara is family in all but blood, and Michael is our family attorney. There's nothing to discuss that they can't hear." James looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Mom, if you're trying to delay the inevitable—" "Not at all," I interrupted smoothly. "I simply want everyone to understand exactly what's happening here." Wine. Dinner progressed with superficial conversation, the tension building with each course. Audrey barely touched her food, repeatedly checking her watch and trying to steer the conversation toward the sale documents. James ate mechanically, his eyes darting between his wife and me. Finally, as dessert was served, Richard's favorite key lime pie, I decided the time had come. "So about the house," I began, setting down my fork. Audrey, you seem to believe that James has the authority to sell this property. I'm curious what gave you that impression. Audrey's straightened confidence flowing back. It's simple. Richard left everything to James as his only heir. You've been living here on borrowed time. She looked at James for confirmation, but he was studying his pie with unusual intensity. Interesting theory, I replied. Michael, perhaps you could clarify the actual situation. Michael opened his briefcase and removed a thick document. This property, along with most of the Wilson assets, is held in an irrevocable family trust established 15 years ago. Cecilia is the primary trustee, I am the secondary trustee, and James is a beneficiary, not an owner. He slid the trust document across the table. The trust has specific conditions for property transfer that cannot be circumvented by the document you presented, which I should note appears to have been signed while Mrs. Wilson was under medical sedation. A clear case of fraud. Audrey's face flushed. That's ridiculous. James told me his father left everything to him. All eyes turned to James, who looked stricken. That's what you told me, Audrey. You said your lawyer friend reviewed the will and discovered I had rights to the property once we were married. This was the opening I had hoped for. James, when have you ever known your father to be careless with legal matters? Did you actually see this supposed will yourself? His silence was answer enough. There's something else you should know. I continued nodding to Detective Ramirez, who had been silently observing from the corner of the room. This is Detective Ramirez. He specializes in real estate fraud. The detective stepped forward. Ms. Peters, or should I say Ms. Donovan, we've been building a case file on your activities across several states. Audrey's composure cracked. This is harassment. James, tell them to stop this nonsense right now. But James was staring at the detective. What did you call her, Donovan? Detective Ramirez placed a folder on the table. Angela Donovan, also known as Andrea Davis, Amanda Peterson, and most recently, Audrey Peters. Married 4 times, including to you, Dr. Wilson, though her divorce from husband number 3, Robert Caldwell, was only finalized 2 weeks before your wedding. The color drained from James's face. What? I reached for my son's hand. James, she's done this before, 3 times. Married wealthy men tried to gain control of their assets, then moved on. There's even an ongoing investigation into the suspicious death of her second husband. These are lies, Audrey shrieked, standing so abruptly her chair toppled backward. James, we need to leave. Now. James remained seated, looking shell-shocked. Is it true? He asked quietly. Was our marriage even legal if you were still married to someone else? Technically, yes, Michael interjected, but it would be grounds for annulment if you pursued that option. Audrey's strategy shifted instantly. Tears filled her eyes as she reached for James. Baby, I can explain everything. They're twisting things to turn you against me. Don't you see? Your mother can't stand that you love someone else. She's trying to control you through your inheritance. For a moment, James seemed torn. Then his gaze fell on the photos I'd placed at each setting, memories of our family life, of the values Richard had instilled in him. The house sale, he said slowly. The buyers you lined up. They're not real. Are they? Audrey's silence confirmed his suspicion. What was your plan? He pressed. Fake a sale, collect the money, and disappear. Were you going to leave me too, once you got what you wanted? Audrey's tears vanished, replaced by cold calculation. This isn't over, she hissed, gathering her things. I have rights as your wife. Community property laws don't apply to trust assets, Michael finished for her. And given the fraud you've attempted, I'd tread very carefully about making further claims. Detective Ramirez stepped forward. Ms. Donovan, I'd like you to accompany me to the station to answer some questions about these documents you've presented. The look Audrey gave me was pure venom. You think you've won? This isn't over, old woman. As Detective Ramirez escorted her out, James collapsed in his chair, head in his hands. Mom, I don't even know what to say. How could I have been so blind? I moved to his side, wrapping an arm around his shoulders as I had when he was a child. Love makes us vulnerable, sweetheart. She's manipulated men much older and supposedly wiser than you. Looking up at me with tear-filled eyes, he asked, How can you even stand to look at me after how I've treated you? The things I said? Because I'm your mother, I said simply, and nothing will ever change that. As the reality of Audrey's betrayal sank in, James began the painful process of reconstructing his understanding of the past year. The lies, the manipulation, the subtle isolation from friends and family, all part of a calculated scheme he had mistaken for love. In that moment of raw vulnerability surrounded by the evidence of Audrey's deception, my son returned to me, not as the same person he was before. He would carry these scars forever, but as someone who once again recognized the difference between true family love and predatory manipulation disguised as affection. The weeks following Audrey's exposure were challenging for all of us, but particularly for James. The initial shock gave way to a complex mix of emotions: humiliation, anger, grief for the relationship he thought he had, and overwhelming guilt for how he had treated me. Audrey was charged with multiple counts of fraud, both for the attempted property sale and for several other schemes discovered during the investigation. She was released on bail pending trial and immediately filed for divorce from James, claiming emotional abuse and demanding half of his personal assets despite the prenuptial agreement she had signed. James moved into our guest house, temporarily needing both proximity to family support and space to process his emotions. The first few days, he barely spoke, spending hours walking along the beach or sitting in Richard's study surrounded by his father's books. "I should have listened to Dad," he told me one evening as we watched the sunset from the terrace. "He always said to be wary of people who seem too perfect, too agreeable. Nobody's that perfect," he used to say. "Real love has rough edges." I smiled sadly. "Your father was a good judge of character, but we all make mistakes, James. The question is what we learn from them." As James began sorting through his financial records, he discovered the full extent of Audrey's spending. She had run up massive credit card debt in his name, borrowed money from his personal accounts, and even pawned some family heirlooms he had inherited from Richard, items whose sentimental value far exceeded their financial worth. "She was bleeding me dry while planning her next move," he said, staring at the statements spread across the kitchen island. If she couldn't get the house directly, she was going to drain as much value as possible before moving on. The divorce proceedings were predictably ugly. Audrey hired an aggressive attorney who specialized in high-asset divorces, demanding alimony despite the short marriage. She leaked stories to local gossip columns portraying herself as the victim of a controlling family dynasty. Thankfully, the evidence against her was substantial, and the prenuptial agreement Richard had insisted upon proved invaluable. Throughout this ordeal, I watched my son gradually rebuild himself. He started therapy, reconnected with old friends Audrey had subtly pushed away, and recommitted to his medical practice, finding solace in helping others. Our relationship, though wounded, began to heal as well. One particularly difficult night after a grueling day in divorce court, James and I sat in the kitchen sharing tea and leftover apple pie. "I said terrible things to you, Mom," he said, staring into his cup. "Things I didn't even believe. But she kept suggesting them, implying them, until somehow they seemed plausible. How could I have turned against you so completely?" I reached across the table to take his hand. "It's called coercive control, sweetheart. It happens gradually, expertly. She isolated you from people who knew the real you, then rewrote your narrative. It wasn't your fault. But I should have seen through it," he insisted. "I'm a doctor. I'm supposed to be intelligent, observant." "Intelligence doesn't make you immune to emotional manipulation," I explained gently. "In fact, intelligent people are sometimes easier targets because they trust their own judgment so completely. They can't imagine being fooled." As the weeks turned to months, James began spending more time at the main house again. We started cooking together, a hobby we had shared before Audrey. We looked through old family albums, reminding ourselves of the solid foundation our family was built upon. One evening, as we sorted through Richard's collection of vintage wines, selecting bottles that had reached their prime, James paused, holding a 1982 Bordeaux his father had purchased the year James was born. "Dad was saving this for my wedding," he said quietly. "My real wedding to someone worthy of joining our family. And someday you'll open it for exactly that occasion," I assured him. "When you're ready. When it's real." The community rallied around us in ways that touched me deeply. Neighbors who had watched James grow up stopped by with home-cooked meals and offers of support. Richard's old business partners checked in regularly, providing both legal advice and friendship. Even James's ex-fiancée Laura reached out when she heard what had happened, not to gloat but to express genuine concern. The most powerful moment of healing came 6 months after Audrey's arrest. James had been sorting through his personal belongings, deciding what to keep and what to discard from his brief marriage when he found a small box containing his father's pocket watch, an item we thought had been lost forever. She pawned the case but kept the watch, James explained, showing me the timepiece Richard had carried for 40 years. Maybe she thought it would be worth more someday, or maybe she kept it as leverage. I don't know. I watched as he carefully wound the watch, his hands steady despite the emotion in his eyes. I think I'm finally ready to move back into the main house, he said, if that's okay with you. This has always been your home too, I told him. It's what your father wanted, a place for our family for generations to come. That night we hosted a small dinner party for our closest friends, the people who had stood by us through the darkness. As we gathered around the dining table where we had exposed Audrey's deception, the mood was completely transformed. Laughter replaced tension, genuine affection replaced manipulation, and the house itself seemed to sigh with relief at having its true family restored. 6 months after Audrey's dramatic exit from our lives, our family home once again became a place of healing and new beginnings. James had fully moved back into his old wing of the house while I maintained my privacy in the master suite. The arrangement gave us both independence and togetherness, a balance that felt right as we rebuilt our lives. The legal proceedings against Audrey continued, but we had detached ourselves emotionally from the outcome. Whether she served prison time or not, she no longer had power over our family. James's divorce was finalized with minimal financial damage thanks to Richard's foresight in creating a prenuptial agreement and keeping most assets in the family trust. One sunny Sunday morning, as we enjoyed breakfast on the terrace, James looked more relaxed than I had seen him in years. He had thrown himself back into his medical practice, even pioneering a new surgical technique that was gaining attention in neurosurgical journals. "I've been thinking about Dad a lot lately," he said, spreading homemade marmalade on his toast, about how he always planned 10 steps ahead. I smiled, remembering Richard's strategic mind. He called it chess thinking, anticipating not just the next move, but the entire game. James nodded thoughtfully. The trust he created, the safeguards, the contingency plans, he protected us even after he was gone. He looked out at the ocean view Richard had loved so much. I want to honor that legacy. I'm thinking of establishing a foundation in his name focused on preventing elder financial abuse and fraud. My heart swelled with pride. James had transformed his painful experience into a desire to protect others, exactly what his father would have wanted. "That's a wonderful idea," I said. "Your father would be so proud of how you've handled all of this." James reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "He'd be proud of both of us, Mom. Especially you. You saw through Audrey from the beginning, and when I was too blind to listen, you found a way to show me the truth without destroying me in the process. You could have just evicted us both, had her arrested immediately, but you chose the path that would preserve our relationship." His words touched me deeply. The path hadn't been easy, and there had been moments when anger tempted me toward more drastic measures. But preserving our family bond had always been my North Star, guiding my decisions even in the darkest moments. In the months since Audrey's departure, we had taken concrete steps to strengthen the legal protections around our home and assets. Michael helped us update the trust documents, adding additional safeguards against similar schemes in the future. We installed a new security system that required biometric verification for access to sensitive areas of the house, including Richard's study and the document storage room. Most importantly, we had honest conversations about the future. James and I sat down with financial advisors to create transparency around the family wealth and establish clear expectations. There would be no more secrets, no more assumptions that could be exploited by outsiders. "I'd like to host a neighborhood gathering next weekend," I suggested as we cleared the breakfast dishes. "Nothing fancy, just a casual barbecue to thank everyone who supported us. What do you think?" James smiled warmly. "I think that's perfect. This house should be filled with friends again." The gathering turned out to be exactly what we needed: sunshine, good food, and genuine connections with people who cared about us. Watching James laugh with our neighbors' children, discussing medical advancements with colleagues, and simply being himself again filled me with profound gratitude. Later that evening, as the last guest departed and we sat by the outdoor fireplace watching the sunset, James asked a question that caught me off guard. Do you think I'll ever trust anyone enough to fall in love again? I considered his question carefully before answering. Yes, I do, but it will be different next time. You'll love with your eyes open with healthy caution rather than blind trust. That's not a bad thing, James. That's wisdom. He nodded slowly. I've been talking about this in therapy, about the difference between being guarded and being discerning. I don't want to wall myself off from connection, but I never want to be that naive again. There's a balance, I agreed. Your father used to say that trust isn't naivety when it's accompanied by wisdom. You can open your heart while still protecting yourself with good boundaries and clear agreements. As darkness fell and the coastal fog rolled in, we remained by the fire, talking about Richard, about healing, about the future. In those quiet moments, I felt the full circle of our journey, from the family we had been to the painful separation engineered by Audrey, and now to this new configuration stronger in some ways for having been tested. The house around us stood as it always had, solid and enduring. The walls that had witnessed our joy and pain for decades continued to shelter us, not because of legal documents or property rights, but because this was where we belonged. No scheme, no deception, no legal maneuver could ever change that essential truth. As I looked at my son's face in the firelight, I saw Richard's strength and integrity reflected there, tempered now by hard-won wisdom. Whatever challenges the future might hold, we would face them together, protected not just by the legal safeguards Richard had created, but by the unbreakable bond between us, a bond that had survived its greatest test. Trust isn't naivety when it's accompanied by wisdom, I repeated softly. The house my husband and I built stands strong, not just in its foundation, but in the love that protects it. No legal document can transfer what truly matters, the spirit of home that lives within us. James smiled, the peaceful expression of someone who had found his way back to his true self. So what would you say was the most important lesson in all of this? He asked. I thought for a moment before answering, that our greatest wealth isn't in our possessions or even this beautiful home. It's in knowing who truly belongs in our inner circle, who deserves our trust, and having the courage to protect those boundaries. I'll drink to that, James said, raising his glass in a toast. As the stars emerged above our family home, I felt a profound sense of peace. The house Richard and I had built would continue to shelter generations of our family, not because of locks or legal documents, but because we had learned how to protect what truly matters. What about you? Have you ever had to protect something precious from someone who didn't understand its true value? How did you maintain your boundaries while still keeping your heart open? Share your experience in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story if it resonated with you. Remember, sometimes our greatest strength comes from the challenges that threaten to break us. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I hope to see you again next time.